to another episode of the Veriswap YouTube show. Today we have Kunal, otherwise known as Sports Card Invest. How's it going, Kunal?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me, Raymond.
Absolutely. I saw you. I've been seeing you a lot recently. I saw you on Saturday. Saw you on Friday. uh,
Yeah.
it's a trend. But fun fact: Kunal actually lives like 10 minutes away from me.
Yeah.
So we're both in Northern California.
Yeah, it's a small scene out here, but it's pretty tight knit. I feel there's like all the shows in the Bay Area. There's like all the same people, which is pretty cool. I've gotten pretty close to a lot of people from the Bay Area, but yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's always the same people setting up. A lot of times it's like, the same teams. A lot of Warriors fans out here. But glad to have you on today, Kunal. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? How you got started in the hobby, all the way until today?
Yeah. So for those of you who don't quite know what I do or haven't really heard of my brand, I run Sports Card Invest. We have YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and pretty much all platforms. We, of course, have a membership program as well, where we kind of give advice, but a little bit of backstory on how I got into cards. So I've personally been a collector for as long as I can remember, probably around 8 to 9 years. I started off in baseball. As you guys know, me and Raymond are from the Bay Area. So the Giants had that big run from when they won in 2010, 2012, 2014. So the baseball culture was really hot in the Bay Area. I was big into baseball cards at that time. And then throughout high school and everything, I got out of sports cards a little bit. But then I pretty much got back into it around 2019. When I started to see a little bit of a trend, I was in sneakers before that a little bit. And I would kind of, have a natural, I'd say, sense for spotting trends, figuring out where people are going to go next, what's going to be like the next hot thing. And I kind of saw that with sports cards. It was just momentum starting to gain. And of course, being a big sports fan, having collected back in the day, it was kind of like the perfect opportunity for me to mix in like my love with business and then my love for sports and sports cards. So I started with that. I started on Instagram, just posting pics, hey, this is what I bought today, kind of like a vlog style, content scheme. And essentially there started to be a little bit of a growing demand for my picks. I was kind of always, I would say, thinking one step ahead of most people. Like if you guys remember back in like January to April 2020, when everyone was so focused on those Luka Doncic rookie cards, those Trae Young rookie cards, during that time, I was buying quite a lot of like Kobe, LeBron, kind of like just one step ahead. I was like, if this domino falls and modern becomes so hot, there's going to be a price correction for vintage. And sure enough, a lot of people who invested in Luka and Trae did well and got maybe a 40% return on their money. But for me, someone who invested in guys like Kobe and LeBron got more of like a 4 to 5x return. I remember buying Kobe tops PSA 10s for probably around $200 to $300, and probably 3 to 4 weeks later they were like $1,200 to $1,300. Same with LeBron. His tops chrome went from like $800 to $2,500 or $3,000 in a span of a month or two. So I definitely think just always having that kind of investor mentality to not following the herds but to be a step ahead of them, I think has kind of been what kind of brought Sports Card Invest to life. And then when I saw a real growing demand, people DMing me, I probably was getting 10 to 20 DMs a day, like, what are you investing in next? All that stuff. So that's where I kind of saw a growing demand for something. And I was like, why not make a course to kind of try to sell it to the masses? So that's how, I guess, my little story on how I got to the position I am today.
So in terms of like selling a course and marketing it to the masses, how has that course changed over the time from like its inception to like where it is today?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it started, it was more of like short-term picks. So I think this card's going to be hot in the next 2 months. So I would say it was more of a short-term mentality. I think we've kind of reached a point where I feel like the people who are in the hobby right now, who are riding through the ups and downs, are really more so in it for the long term, is what I've noticed. Of course, there are always going to be those short-term flippers, and we still have plenty of picks that we give out to short-term flippers. Like, this card's going to be hot when the NBA season comes around. Buy it now for this price, sell it now for that price type thing. But I think we're really trying to gear a little bit more towards the longer-term investors. I know there's a lot of like institutional money that I believe is going to come into the market over the next few months. And over the next few years, to be honest. I want to speak always from a more long-term perspective, because I know that, it's impossible to really predict the next month or two in the sports card hobby, especially with all, the uncertainty around the economy and everything. But I definitely think, if you take a more long-term perspective, if you look at the amount of sports fans there are, the amount of people Fanatics has under them buying stuff on their website, and with Fanatics coming in, I definitely think we're going to, reach a much broader audience for sports cards and investors in general. So I think we're definitely trying to take more of a long-term approach, potentially going into portfolio management, where we physically, manage people's portfolios, buy, sell, trade for them. So that's coming in the near future. But yeah, as of now, it's, really just trying to take a little bit of a more long-term approach.
I think the long-term approach really reflects the changing tides in the hobby, right? Like, in 2020, prices of Bobo prisms would fluctuate based on his performance in the game. Tyler Hero shot up after he did well for a few games, right? But I feel like now people, maybe it's like all these these quick flick investors are exiting, or maybe they're kind of I guess becoming more mature. But it does seem like they're kind of going for kind of a long-term approach. So I think it definitely makes sense that the product that you're selling also caters to a more long-term approach. I think your point about portfolio management is really interesting. This is the first time I've ever heard of it, kind of just people managing other people's money from perspective of buying and selling cards. Is that something that a vision that you want to implement in the near future, or maybe farther down the line?
Yeah, so I think it's going to come a little bit sooner than I'd initially expected. I think with a lot of institutional money coming in, there's a lot of investors who see the growth in the market. They see, for example, the PWCC 500 or the PWCC 100, which are essentially, index funds for sports cards. And if you look at the overall price trends, for at least most sports, they're outpacing the S&P 500 and other big, investment index funds. So I definitely think a lot of investors are trying to get in. However, I don't think a lot of these big investors have, there's a learning curve, I'd say. There's a big learning curve. There's so many mistakes that both of us and pretty much most investors have gone through, whether it's with comps, whether it's with what to buy when, where the market's at. It's just kind of more of an understanding that you can't get from getting into the hobby today, right? You can't have that understanding. So I definitely think at some point, there's going to be people who are trying to put in a lot of money, who believe in the market, but don't quite know where to put it. And I think that's where we're trying to really help out and, just use our track record to help other people's portfolios. And at the end of the day, that's, a big risk on our end as well. It's, a make or break moment, I'd say, for, the company, just because, you have to, at some point, if you're not giving returns, people aren't going to come back to you. So I definitely think now is also a great time in the market to be investing. I think there's going to be a lot of growth to be had in months. So I definitely think, that's the route we're wanting to take right now.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you saying that now is a good time to be investing in months. I mean, overall the market has been pretty slow I would say for the past maybe 5 to 6 months. But judging from Saturday's golden auctions, I was telling you about this on when we met. It seems like a lot of the prices actually ended strong. And I have no interest in this. I haven't bought a card in a while. But I was looking at the prices, and I was wow, some of these prices are actually pretty solid, and you kind of see cards bouncing up from their lows. So definitely agree with that. It's kind of when what they say, rising tides make all the ships go up. But some ships go up more than others, right? So I think it's cool how you're using your expertise to pick out the cards that you think will outperform the rest of the market. That's yeah. So really excited to see what is to come. Uh, taking a step back, like, why do you like doing this?
I just love, first of all, I do love business as a whole. I just really have like, I'm a numbers guy. I get a high from, you know, just seeing stuff go up, seeing stuff go, like everything about business really excites me. But then also sports cards. Like I've been in it for since my childhood, right? I thoroughly enjoy just like I was always a collector at heart. And so even when I'm investing in cards, and even if I don't have, physical attachment to every card, it's still just really cool to own certain different cards, especially stuff that I grew up like really chasing and never quite got to it just because stuff was out of my price range. Like at that time, like $200 card was like pretty crazy. And you could get incredible value for your money with $200. And so just seeing myself own those cards and better is pretty crazy. I know myself as a kid would be like going crazy over the cards that I have today, which is pretty cool to think about. But yeah, I'd say in general, just love for sports cards plus love for business, love for numbers, that type thing just really gets me excited. It's kind of tough to like pinpoint an exact, like, it's just kind of a feeling that I get from sports cards that I've been involved in other businesses and I don't feel the same way. It's more so just my love for business that drives me. But in this case, it's love for sports cards, and plus love for business. So it's just kind of a trifecta that really makes it exciting.
It's kind of that combination of the three, right? Where it's like there's kind of a mix of everything in cards. I think like I'm very much the same way, like right. Like I studied economics in college. Really interested in like the market aspect of cards, but also really like the sports aspect as well, right? As well as the people aspect of kind of like talking to different types of collectors. It just seems like there's like so many different parts in this hobby.
Very true.
You don't really, like someone looking in, they might just be like, oh, it's just a bunch of people collecting cards, right? But you look closer and it's like there's just so many different parts of the ecosystem that you don't really know exist until you kind of dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah, shows are definitely like have become my favorite. I've been going to probably like 2 shows a week.
2 shows a week. Oh, I didn't even know there were that many in the. See, I didn't know there were that many. In the Bay Area.
Yeah, this weekend is Westgate. Last weekend, of course, we had the Castro show, and then I would say the overall scene right now, plus the trade nights that happen a lot in Hayward and that side. So I think the Bay Area scene and in general, a lot of smaller, even like smaller states are getting pretty good shows. Even when I'm out in the East Coast, like Connecticut shows. I remember the Mohegan Sun one was very big. So there's just a lot of different shows that, apart from the usual, like the Dallases, the Nationals, of course. But there's just a lot of smaller shows opening up. And I think it's really cool to see, especially for new people trying to get into the hobby. Whenever people come up to me, like even people I know in my personal life who are like, I want to get into sports cards. Like, what should I do? I'm like, go out to shows.
Yep.
Just talk to people. I think that's it's just something that sticks with me personally more than looking at price trends online and everything, as great and as important as that is. And I still recommend that. I think there's just something different when you go out to a show, you see all these cards priced, you see all these people making offers, you see it firsthand, you're talking to people. I think that's like the best way to dive into the hobby. So I definitely think shows are like incredibly exciting, and just, a rush of excitement when you have these cards that you're trying to sell, cards that you're trying to buy. Trades, of course, are key in the hobby right now. So yeah.
Yeah, I can see the excitement in your eyes when you're talking about the shows. To me, I love going to them because it's just cool to meet different types of collectors. Kind of like you said, like kind of like see the cards in front of you. It's very, very different from like, say, for example, like looking on eBay and like scrolling through a probe scene auction, right? Having the cards physically in front of you. I think that's a very, very cool experience. I guess like at shows, like what so like what do you typically do at shows? Like maybe like a breakdown. Do you like go in with a plan? Do you kind of just like try to wing it? Like what's your typical approach?
I do have usually a set of cards that I bring to every show, depending on what the clientele is. So on most like smaller local shows, I try to bring cards that are more so in the reach of a lot of investors. So usually like under $2,000, I think, for the smaller shows. Of course, I have prices in mind. I kind of comp them out, you know, the night before and figure out exactly what the lowest I take for each card is. And then I just kind of go in there. Of course, I always have a list of players that I'm looking for and trying to buy at a given moment, depending on what season it is, you know, and all that type of stuff. But yeah, I definitely think, you know, at some point, it's not good to overplan because you're never, you know, it's when you go to shows, like your plans never come to pass. It's just kind of the way it is. You just don't know what you're going to see. You don't know what offers you're going to get. You don't know what collectors you're going to run into. So it's definitely, you know, a space where I just think I personally, my strategy is I walk in with cards. If it's Dallas or National or another bigger show, I'll bring more high end. If it's local shows, bring more low end. But at the end of the day, I think it's really all about connecting with people. I think is a really underrated aspect. And those connections can lead to deals, you know, that you wouldn't imagine, right? So I think there's more so instead of walking into shows and just walking up to every dealer like, hey, do you want to buy my card? Hey, I'm looking to buy your card. Starting that conversation, I think, can go beyond that. You get people's numbers. When they see a card that you're looking for, they'll message you. When you have a card, you can always reach out to them. And it's more so like a personal connection as opposed to just, do you want to buy my card? And I think that's where a lot of people at shows, I wouldn't say like mess up, but it's something that they're missing out on, to build those relationships, because that's for the long term. When you're buying, selling, trading, everything for the long term, relationships are going to matter a lot more than, you know, squeezing an extra $5 out of someone or something like that. So yeah, I definitely think just having that more long-term perspective is very vital in the hobby, because I personally was one person who, when I got in, I talked to Raymond about this a little bit, but it's easy to have that short-term perspective, especially when you see cards go up 2x. You're just like, I want to find the next card to go up 2x and sell it. But I think in general, if you're trying to be into cards for a long time, try to really make a living out of it. You know, reputation matters a lot. You'll be surprised how small the hobby is, in terms of the same people you see at the same shows. You know, and if you're selling a card and the card goes up and the other person makes money as well, they're more likely to buy from you than if you just charge them over comps, they lose money on it. The next time you try to make a trade with them, it's going to be tougher than if they had a great sale and they made money too. So just that type of perspective, I really encourage people to kind of just shift. And I personally had to shift my perspective a little bit too. When in 2020, it was just a rush for money, it felt like, for a lot of people in the hobby, and it was easy to get sucked into it. But I think now it's more so building for the long term in the hobby, is whether it's via companies getting into more, you know, long-term buying and selling and trading, or, you know, just reputation wise.
Yeah, I think it's amazing that you said that. Like, we literally had this conversation on Friday. I 100% agree. You know, I'm 27, you're 20 years old. That's something that I 100% wish I knew when I was 20 years old. So it's, I think it's like genuinely like invaluable that you like have been able to experience that firsthand and like learn that lesson early, because that's definitely like one thing that that I wish I had known earlier. I think generally also like there's kind of like this hobby. I definitely agree. Like there's this like obsession with like short term. There's a lot of like short term thinking in the hobby. I'm not sure like why it is. Maybe it's because like cards are so expensive now. It's like, you know, like when a card can like pay for your entire family trip to Mexico, like you know, you obviously want to focus on the money in the short term. But I think like, I think like people in general, not just like cards, but in life, I think would benefit from kind of like thinking more long term, right? Because like life is long, right? And when you're young, you know, you kind of like only have a certain amount of time to like make these like long term decisions. So yeah, like thinking long term, that's like kind of like I think that personally like the reason like why I built Veriswap, right? Because like, you know, I saw this problem and I was like, okay, like I want to build something that's like longer term rather than kind of like be involved in the kind of the day to day. So, and I think like, yeah, it makes me really happy to kind of like hear you kind of like echo like what I've been thinking as well. Yeah, I think the long term game is like what makes people stick in the hobby. right?
Yeah.
Because like on the flip side, it's like, okay, like if someone like gets burned like playing the short term
Exactly.
game, they're not going to come back.
I
Right?
know. That's the thing. And I think that's
So
where the little disconnect was from people who got in. And most of the people I know who got in before 2020 have really stuck with it. And a lot of people I know who got in 2021 during the high or in end of 2020, it's tougher for them to swallow those losses. And I think that's where if you were trying to make a quick buck and it didn't work out, well, now you have a really bad taste in your mouth. So I definitely think, you know, having a more long-term approach, you're willing to, you know, push through, you know, the L's you take, because we've all had cards that we've bought into and they've crashed, or, you know, you've lost a lot of money on a card or a deal. But at the end of the day, you know, if you have that long-term approach, you're willing, you just kind of accept that the L's are going to be a part of the journey. And I think that's what allows you to really see success. If you stick with it for a good amount of time and push through everything, you're going to eventually learn from everything and get to a point where you can consistently make good money on deals.
Yeah, I think kind of like taking L's, I think is part of the journey, right? Like I think there's like kind of this mentality where it's like, oh, you have to at least break even or make money on every single transaction, right? That's like one thing that I wish I had like learned sooner, because I think I wasted a lot of time trying to milk money out of cards that I shouldn't have made money on, and like I should have just like, you know, taken the L and moved on. Because at the end of the day, like time is most valuable, right? Like you can like take the L and like save time, or you can not take the L and like waste a ton of time, right? And 9 times out of 10, the option of taking the L is going to be more efficient for you in the long run.
Yeah, there's so many people who are just, I need to make this back to make my money back, and then you end up holding it for too long because no one's willing to pay over market, and then it crashes even more. So if you, at the end of the day, it's like sunk cost, right? When you bought into a card at 3,000, if it's worth 2,000 now, and you can put that 2,000 to use at a better spot, like in a better card, always do that, because there's no point of trying to make it back on a lost card that, you know, has already gone down and could go down more. I think the best thing to do is just at that point, take your loss, move it into the best investment you can find for 2,000 and go from there. That's definitely my advice.
Yeah, and to figure out what the best card is for $2,000, sign up for Sports Card Invest.
I saw that coming.
So Kunal, so in terms of like you know, like long-term vision for you, I guess you personally, as well as you for your company Sports Card Invest, where do you want to take this?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see myself branching out and the company branching out into a few different spots. Like I said, portfolio management. We have a few other things in the work that are more on the company side. So coming out with new innovation in the industry, I think, is going to be a big place that, you know, longer term investors and everything, I think, whether investing personally into companies or starting my own, I think that's something I really want to go to more towards the company side, have a product kind of behind the name. I think is something, you know, that has been in the works for a while and is going to be, you know, announced to the public soon. So I definitely think, you know, while taking a long-term approach, I want to build something in the hobby that's more than buying, selling, and trading, or, you know, membership program I really love and I think is going to do good long-term. But I still want to kind of build a second leg that, you know, can kind of scale past the brand and kind of become a staple in the hobby. So yeah, I think that's kind of what my eyes are on the company side. I still think there's so much room for innovation in the hobby. I think a lot of people are always looking at from, you know, if you look at the hobby and business opportunities, it's like buy, sell, trade, go to shows, you know, and as great as that is, I definitely think there's just so many different things that I think are a little bit inefficient, I would say, in the hobby. And a lot of people are already coming up with them. We know Alt has done a really good job, like in terms of price tracking, and it's kind of become one of the key places to check comps at shows. You know, of course, Veriswap's doing something great with trading, right? Of course, there's just many different ideas like that I think can be taken advantage of if you're a business savvy person, if you have an idea. And, you know, at the end of the day, the hobby's small. So if you can get the word around, going to shows, marketing your product, I think, you know, there's endless opportunity there.
What processes do you feel like are really inefficient that you feel like people haven't really put an effort into solving yet?
Um, well, I had thought that about trading for a while until Veriswap, but I would say in general, like I've always thought there should be a trade map, or sorry, a show map,
Yeah.
of like all the shows in the hobby, going around just on a map, like when is this show, what is, where's that show kind of thing. So every single month, like a whole list of shows on a map around the country, around the world, to be honest, because a lot of shows are coming international now. So I think that's kind of an idea that I really had and I want to implement, just to help people out on that sense. I know so many people are hearing about shows through group chats or just like talking to people in the hobby. Whereas for the mainstream, it's tough to kind of, I know there's the show locator on Instagram who does it pretty well. But I still think there's a lot of room for like just making everything a lot more simpler. And I think shows are one of the things that could, really be made easier to find where they are and what time they are.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like when you told me how you were going to like 2 shows a week, I wasn't even aware that there
Yeah.
were 2 shows a week. So like I do this every day, so I can't
Yeah.
imagine someone who does this on the side, like them being aware of anything, right?
Yeah.
And I think key to momentum in the hobby too, right? Like kind of like if you go to 2 shows a week, you're like constantly involved in the hobby. Whereas if you do go to like 1 show every month, like it's a lot more difficult to kind of like build that community and eventually like get yourself, into the hobby community.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think shows are really cool. I think it would be cool if like there's maybe this is like another new business idea, but like like companies that like plan shows, right? I think there could be benefits and scale from like standardization in the way like shows are run.
Mm-hmm.
So what I mean by that is like like you have like a branded show in multiple cities across the country, with kind of like the different suppliers, different advertisers, different food vendors, right? I think that would be really interesting. I'm kind of surprised that like no one has really done that yet.
Yeah. I mean, there's just so many different things that I think about on a daily basis where I'm like, how has nobody really gone that way? I think on the content side, there's also a lot of room for innovation. If people out there are, aspiring content creators, I think sports cards in general have a lot of room for growth on the content side. We're seeing a lot of people, like most recently, I've been watching like Roth Cards. There's a few other guys on YouTube who are doing an incredible job at just documenting their sports card journey. And I really recommend, if you guys want to be in sports cards for the long term, it really helps not only on the business side, but also like, yeah, doing deals in person. If you have that reputation, if you're on YouTube, if you're documenting stuff, it's a lot easier to make deals. And I've kind of realized that. So, I definitely think on the content side, a lot of room for innovation to just come up with new series. As I've been thinking about, like just whether it's flipping up, trading up, like just cool series that I think are going to be really cool for, people to watch and learn the hobby, via a more interactive content style.
Yeah, that was actually kind of like the idea of like trading up, flipping up. That was actually an idea that we were like thinking about doing with Veriswap, right? Like working with like content creators such as yourself, kind of like document, the trading up journey for cards, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that is in the books, Kunal, in a little bit.
Oh.
But yeah, kind of like like that YouTube series where it's like, oh, like you trade like a paperclip eventually into a house, right?
Yeah.
But I think on the content creation side there is a lot. There's a lot of creators. I think a lot of the creators are like, kind of like doing a lot of the same stuff. So I think when someone zigs, when like everyone else is zagging, I think that makes for a lot of really interesting content.
Yeah.
So I know you mentioned like Roth Cards. Who are your other favorite content creators?
Yeah, I mean, in the sports card space, I know so on the vlog side, I think Roth is doing the best. In the educational side, I know there's a few others that I really enjoyed watching. I think Sports Card Dad's got an interesting perspective. Of course, Sports Card Investors, like a staple in the hobby, I think does a really good job of a mix of show vlogs with, cards going up, all of that type of different stuff. But yeah, I think those are kind of like the main guys. I see a lot of stuff on my recommend, and I can't quite remember like channel names. But yeah, there's just so many new kind of faces on the scene right now. in terms of content and vlogs, especially, I think have kind of become the staple. A side that I think is really growing. On the breaking side, I think that's also like another big leg of the hobby that I think doesn't get as much love as it should in terms of like the overall hobby scene. I know breaking in terms of business is incredible, but I just think in terms of shows, like I imagine one day down the line, like a lot of breakers getting together at a big show at a convention center of just like a breaking show where people can buy into breaks in person. Like stuff like that, I think can be really innovative in the future. And breakers they're building up that leverage right now. Like you see guys like Pac-Man, of course, like Lil Pullman. There's so many different breakers out there who are doing such cool things. Of course, Cblez. These guys I think are really taking the hobby to the next level in terms of the gambling aspect and just the fun entertainment aspect, instead of just like investing and making the most financial sound decision, which is my personal side. But I also really respect like, just the fun out of it, opening up packs like we all did as a child. Like that stuff is really can draw people into the hobby. It can get a lot of dads back in it with their kids, I've realized. Just like having their kids open up packs has been really cool. So yeah, I think on the content side, I really enjoy, especially on Whatnot, just like tuning into breaks, buying in, just having fun on that side.
Yeah, I definitely agree with like kind of like the how like a lot of the existing creators can kind of like go in like many different directions. Breaking on the content side, I think it'd be cool if like different breakers that kind of had like, I feel like it'd be cool to kind of see like what life as a breaker like behind the scenes would look like. I could imagine like they have a lot of like I'd be able to learn a lot of things, and I feel like some other people would be able to learn as well. Because I think like at the end of the day, breaking is cool, but at the end of the day, like breaking is a commodity too, right? Like it's kind of like a service you're buying. Having like Blez open a pack is not so much different than having Layton open a pack, right?
Yeah.
So like maybe on the content side, like these breakers can like really stand out. I'll talk to you about this, Kunal. Like I feel like I feel like no one's really kind of like done the angle of like I'm an entrepreneur that happens to flip sports cards, like that angle. Kind of like you're expanding your audience to kind of like people who are interested in entrepreneurship rather than people who are interested in sports cards, right?
Yeah.
Like I think like no one has yet to do that, and I feel like the first person to do that well could really gain a very strong following, right? I mean, you see like personal finance YouTubers, they kind of like talk about their side hustles, right? But often like it's often like very like vague advice. It's like, oh, I flip couches, or like, oh, just get a job on Fiverr or something, right? Like I don't know how concrete something like that is, but it's like, okay, you do something with sports cards and you can like secure the day to day, kind of like Sasha used to do, right? But
yeah,
I think that would be really cool, and as someone like looking at it'd help us all out with getting new people in the hobby.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I think entrepreneurship is something that's like so blended, especially in my like age group. And like the guys who are growing up now in this digital age, there's just endless possibilities. Like back in the day, it was like to make money, you had to go in person to a job, do this work, right? I think nowadays with the internet, there's going to be a whole generation of people who are just less traditional, and just more so like I can make a living doing what I love to do. And if you find an industry like sports cards that you really love, if you love sports, if you love collecting, then I think there's really a spot for you here. If you can, there's of course going to be a learning curve and you're going to take losses at first. But if you take that long-term approach and you get into sports cards and you really love sports cards down the line, there's not a much better business to be in terms of upside from here, I think. I just think we're still in, chapter one in terms of the overall new generation sports card scene. I mean, we saw the same happen with sneakers, right? When it kind of had those kids starting to flip sneakers, and then it just became something much bigger than, just a little hobby. So I definitely think sports cards are going to have so many opportunities for people to make livings on it, for people to really just it be their full-time job, which I think is the most cool thing in the world, is like having your hobby, or what everyone calls a hobby, a full-time job. And I think there's a lot of people who are already doing it, which I'm already very surprised. Like the amount of people who are like, yeah, I'm just go to shows. That's my living, right? I go to shows and I set up and I buy, sell, trade sports cards. So I think that's going to be a big thing in the future. And those guys I think are really fundamental in just growing the hobby base, and just making a lot of people more aware of it. Because when it's seen as a hobby, I don't think it's taken as seriously. But when you see people actually making a living from it, like even people in our personal lives, right, who are probably like, what are you up to nowadays? Sports cards. It's just the word can really like just be heard by a lot of people. And when it's like you're living, I think it's taken much more seriously by the masses in this world.
Yeah, I don't know if you get this a lot, but it's like, when I tell people like, oh, like I flip cards as a living, no, sorry, I flip cards, and they're like, oh, like, what's your actual job, right? Like, what's your 9 to 5? So I think a lot of people, they have this belief where it's like, okay, like you can't really do something that you love, and make a living off of it. But I think like cards, like kind of like we see people like do this day to day, like every single day, right? They're kind of just like they make living, more than a living flipping cards. But like from like someone looking in, like it's like a completely new world for them, right? So that's really,
a lot of people
pretty inspirational, I think.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, a lot of people I meet nowadays, like even my banker now is like, when I talk about sports cards, like, oh yeah, I saw that on the news, like that Mickey Mantle sale or whatever, right? So there's like a lot of these little like snippets where just like mind-blowing numbers for sports cards. Even if it's like Justin Herbert card selling for $1.8 million, like if you're a football fan and you can predict the next quarterback, or if you're a football fan and you enjoy, everyone puts so much effort into fantasy football, right? Like predicting which players are going to have a great year. And a lot of people put a lot of money on it too, right? There's a lot of people betting on a daily basis on sports. So I think a lot of that money is going to get into sports cards eventually when the word gets out. Because I just think in general, financially, and as, you kind of get the same rush as being a sports gambler. And we know how big the sports gambling industry is. And if you're willing to take those risks, I think sports cards are going to pay off a lot better than, if you believe in Justin Herbert, for example, right? You could either bet on the Chargers to win the Super Bowl, bet on Justin Herbert to win MVP, or you could take a long-term approach and get into a very nice Justin Herbert card. And if he turns out to be a franchise quarterback, his cards are maybe not Justin Herbert because his cards are already gone crazy. Maybe take like I wouldn't even say Trey Lance because his cards have got really crazy, but like, all right, in the basketball world, right? If you believe in Michael Porter Jr., if you believe in Kawhi Leonard bouncing back and having a great year, instead of betting on the Clippers winning the championship, buy into one of his high-end cards. And if he really pans out, you could see a 4 or 5x return. And you don't have to make that full bet to where you lose all your money if you lose. So I just think a lot of that money is going to get into sports cards, and that's going to further blow up the hobby. So yeah, that's my perspective on that side.
Yeah, Kunal said this on September 13th, 2022. We'll come back in 2 years and see whether or not this prediction is true. That gambling money is going to cards. I genuinely believe it will be. Whether that's from like fanatics entering the hobby, making the hobby a little bit more mainstream. Yeah. Because like truth be told, like it still is a very niche hobby right now. Like you said, like everyone kind of knows each other. I think until we get to the point, where it's like people kind of like they don't know each other anymore. That's when the hobby has like really taken off. Yeah. Right. And I think we kind of saw like glimpses of that in like 2020, 2021. But I definitely like am really optimistic about the industry as a whole. But Kunal, we are running a little bit short on time. If our listeners want to reach out to you, learn a little bit more about your program, how can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm at Sports Card Invest on Instagram, at Sports Card Invest on YouTube, at Sports Cards Invest on TikTok, and then our website, sportscardsinvest.com. So yeah, always feel free. If you have any questions or follow-ups, you can always DM me on Instagram. That's probably the best way to reach me. Happy to help you guys. Happy to, give you guys some advice if you need, of course. But yeah, thank you so much, Raymond, for having me on. I really appreciate this. It's always fun catching up with you.
Absolutely. Certainly a pleasure chatting with you today, and we'll keep in touch.
Yes, for sure.